The next item of business today is the members' business debate on motion number 5450 in the name of Sarah Boyack on enough food for everyone if Scotland plays its part. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would be grateful if those members who wish to speak in the debate could press the request to speak buttons as soon as possible. And I call on Sarah Boyack to open the debate. 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I very much welcome the opportunity to lead this debate, and I want to start by thanking members across the Chamber who have signed my motion. I also want to place on record my thanks to the Enough Food for Everyone If campaign for their support in briefing members ahead of the debate, and for groups like Oxfam, SCIAF and Save the Children for giving us such superb briefings. My motion starts with a simple statement. Around the world, 870 million people, or 1 in 8 of the total population, are affected by chronic undernourishment. And every year, 2.3 million children die of malnutrition. For those who survive, they experience long-term health impacts which limit their development. These facts are a global scandal and highlight the inequalities that still exist between the world's developing and developed countries. Of the 870 million undernourished people in the world, the overwhelming majority live in developing countries. They experience higher levels of poverty, with low incomes and poor healthcare, education and nutrition. And in the developing world in particular, these challenges are compounded by conflicts, by natural disasters and by climate change, which all add further pressure on food security. Now, there has been some progress in action on hunger at an international level in recent decades, but not enough. And in publishing its latest figures on undernourishment, the UN's Food and Agriculture Organisation has stated that the Millennium Development Goal of halving the proportion of hungry people by 2015 is still achievable. But although the proportion of people who are hungry has dropped from nearly 19% to 12.5% over the past 2 decades, the world's population has grown, so the reduction in the actual number of people who are hungry has not been as pronounced. And despite initial progress towards the MDG target, there now is the global financial crisis which is impacting. And in fact, in Africa, the number of people who go hungry has increased in recent years, and Save the Children's research shows that in 2012, the number of hungry children in the world rose for the first time in a decade. So the IF campaign is absolutely crucial to put this on our agenda. It's the largest coalition of its kind since Make Poverty history. It brings together nearly 150 development organisations covering a broad range of interests and includes some of the UK's best known and respected charities. Over 50,000 people have signed up to support the campaign, with over 90,000 tweets and backing from high-profile figures such as Bill Gates, Desmond Tutu and Joyce Banda. We need to reach a tipping point where the calls for action are so loud that they cannot be ignored by world leaders. 2013 can be the beginning of the end for global hunger, but only if we all act together at all levels of government and society. Many of the Scottish organisations involved have already embraced this proactive approach through NIDOS, the Network of International Development Organisations in Scotland. Their recent Scotland versus Poverty travelling exhibition drew attention to our response to global poverty and hunger, and I was proud to welcome them to our Parliament in January. And this Parliament and Scottish Governments, past and present, have also rightly sought to support international development, and our close links with Malawi in particular will be visible this year as we celebrate the bicentenary of the birth of David Livingstone. But as the IF manifesto points out, there is much more that we in Scotland can do now to support, protect, inspire, learn and improve in our commitment to the developing world. For example, there's what we can do in climate change, crop yields in parts of Africa could fall by half by 2020 and up to a third in Asia by 2050. So support for smallholder farmers to help adapt to extreme weather is fundamental in tackling hunger. Our Climate Change Act has been described as world-leading. We now need to go faster. The IF campaign has an ongoing commitment from the Scottish Government to the International Development Fund and the Climate Justice Fund. They support those funds, and I'd be very interested to hear from the Minister how he thinks they will be developed in the future. Then there's Fair Trade Fortnight. At the start of this week, it was announced that Scotland has achieved Fair Trade Nation status. We should be proud of that achievement and do more to support fair trade and ethical purchasing. And as the IF campaign points out, tax avoidance by big business and wealthy individuals deny developing countries vital resources that could be used to combat hunger. Then there are opportunities for the Scottish Government to lead by example and further support ethical purchasing decisions through the procurement bill. Transparent reporting to assess the direct and indirect impact to the developing world of the Scottish Government's policies would strengthen this approach. Supporting the development of sustainable agriculture is key, but the poorest farmers are losing out because land grabs are taking away their agricultural land and it's been given over to non-food crops. The IF campaign highlights that responsibility for tackling the problems facing the developing world rests with all of us. And there's fantastic work happening in Scotland on global citizenship in our schools, teaching young people not only to understand international issues, but also their role and responsibility in bringing change. But the demand for development education centres, which provides professional support for this fantastic work, is outstripping supply. So some teachers, and therefore pupils, are now missing out. So again, I hope the Minister will reflect on that challenge and say what the Scottish Government is doing to make sure that we have enough support for global citizenship learning across our schools. At a recent meeting of the Cross-Party Group on International Development, the Minister commented that the Scottish Government was giving the objectives of the IF campaign close consideration. So today I hope to hear from the Minister what he and his Government will now do to provide active support. The campaign's four main themes at a UK level are aid, land, tax and transparency. And as the UK takes on the presidency of the G8 this year, we should be well placed to set a positive example and to put world hunger firmly on the agenda. Today, in this place, I hope we will show that the Scottish Parliament continues to be fully engaged and committed to these issues, and that we can send a message to the Scottish and the UK governments that we want everyone to make 2013 the beginning of the end for global hunger. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Turn to the open part of the debate. Speeches of 4 minutes, please. Jamie Hepburn, to be followed by Alison Johnston.
Thank you very much, President Officer. Let me be the first, I'm sure others will, but let me be the first to congratulate Sarah Boyack for bringing forward today's debate. The Enough Food for Everyone campaign is an excellent initiative, well worthy of debate in this place, and I congratulate her for bringing it forward for debate today. And let me also, I'm aware she has a reception next week. Let me pass my apologies. Sadly, won't be able to attend that reception, but I do think it is important that we debate this subject today, and can also congratulate all those organisations involved in the campaign. It's good to see them coming together to collaborate in that fashion. If everyone believes in no hunger or despair will change the world for everyone. President Officer, these are the words of the chorus to a song that was written by Whiteley's Primary School in my constituency. It was actually performed at the launch event for the campaign, and I was very happy to visit Whiteley's Primary School on Monday of this week and see them perform that song. It was absolutely excellent and reaffirms that school's commitment to concepts of global citizenship that have been well entrenched by their head teacher, Anne Kay. They've done work of that nature before. They actually wrote another song for Fair Trade, working with SCIAF, and I know they hope to record this song and work with SCIAF to try and do a bit of fundraising. Again, I wish them well in that regard. And possibly I invite the Minister to come and visit Whiteley's if he gets the opportunity, and would be made welcome. I'm sure they'd love to perform the song for him as well. President Officer, earlier this week, the prophet Isaiah was referred to in Time for Reflection. It reminded me of one of his commands to undo the heavy burdens of the oppressed. And I think we would all agree that doing the best for your children, your child, is a human imperative for all parents. I know that when I'm with my children, that's the imperative I have. And trying to do the best for your children should not be viewed as a heavy burden, but for too many around the globe, as no one should see their child die before them, least of all through hunger. And yet we know that 4 children die every minute through malnutrition. That's why the campaign is important. And we know the 4 key calls upon David Cameron to use the UK's G8 presidency this year to take action on the root causes of the hunger crisis in the poor countries. We know the 4 big ifs are about stopping farmers being forced off their land, about trying to keep governments keep their promises on aid, trying to see governments close loopholes to stop big companies avoiding tax in poor countries, and also about forcing governments and investors to be honest and open about the deals they make in the world's poorest countries. Frankly, I think that would be far better aims than trying to redirect internationally to defence spending, as we see has been suggested elsewhere. And I hope that the UK Government can respond in that regard, and I'm sure the Scottish Government will be putting pressure on them to do so. Malnutrition, of course, also affects the life chances of children. Sarah Boyack talked about the health impact of those who survive. We also know that Save the Children have told us that malnutrition undermines children's future earnings potential by as much as 20%, inhibits economic growth by as much as 3% of GDP. Perhaps not something we think of when we think of this challenge, and I think it's important to make that point, because what it actually means is that the life chances of those affected by poverty has to be part of the equation as well. I know I'm running out of time, President Officer, so let me conclude by inviting, I hope the Scottish Government will respond to the calls for the Enough Food for Everyone campaign. I know they've set out a number of ways that we can help here in Scotland. I thought one of the interesting ones was to try and reflect on Scotland's historic experience of land rights issues, the Highland clearances, the lowland clearances, and perhaps hosting a global land hearing to discuss lessons from Scotland, how they can help inform better practice around the world. I'll be interested to hear how the Scottish Government can take that forward, and once more I congratulate Sarah Boyack on today's debate.
Thank you very much. Alison Johnson, to be followed by Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to discuss these issues in the Chamber today. The resources of so many organisations working together can help focus minds on important global issues, such as the ones raised by F and the motion today: land grabbing, tax dodging, and the impact of Scotland's public and private sectors on developing countries. Hunger is a devastating, debilitating crisis for a shocking number of people around the world. It is right we should be taking every action we can to make sure people have fair access to the resources they need to feed themselves. The problem is often framed as hunger, but really it is not the root problem, rather a horrifying system. And not to investigate the root problem will lead to continual sticky plaster solutions we should not be content to accept. If recognises this, their ask for global citizenship education is to increase our understanding of the complex root causes of hunger and to help people recognise their own role in tackling it. Global citizenship makes the connections between the political decisions and actions of powerful people and companies, often in rich countries, and the poverty, inequality and hunger we see perpetuated around the globe. The powerful influence of some multinational companies, many of whom are based in the UK, allows them to avoid tax here and operate in poorer countries at criminally low rates of taxation, extracting natural resources without fair reward and jeopardising that nation's ability to develop its own economy on its own terms. The issue of tax dodging is on the table today and available for large NGOs to campaign on because of the bold and creative campaigns, direct action by the likes of UK Uncut, many of whose members are treated as domestic extremists by the UK Government. The Scottish Government can set an example and provide real leadership through the forthcoming procurement bill, putting ethical and fair trade considerations at its core, and through a robust, well-resourced and loophole-free Revenue Scotland. This month has seen a light shone on the convoluted, murky supply chains of the meat processing industry, which supplies our supermarket, and reminds us of the power of corporate interests in the food chain. It has an impact on the poorest people in rich countries as well as on poor countries. It's vital to remember that our approach to global food issues must be informed by the hundreds of millions of farmers in developing countries and their communities, not just by the Department for International Development or NGOs. Food sovereignty is the unifying call of the amazing La Via Campesina and other farmers' movements. Food sovereignty means returning control over the food system to farmers. We must learn from them, and we can also learn from the work, perspective and experience of NGOs who are not officially part of the IF campaign. Biofuels are highlighted in the debate motion, and by IF who say we must stop poor farmers being forced off their land for biofuels. And demand for biofuels is driven in the UK by an ill-thought-out mandatory percentage of biofuel in all UK road fuel by April this year, introduced by the Labour government, which urgently needed reviewed at the EU. The UK government has presidency of the G8 this year, and the campaign is timed to put pressure on those countries to change the practices that lock too many poor people into hunger. We shouldn't allow the G8 governments to make warm commitments but to deliver little. That just fuels cynicism and anger. The G8 should not be used by David Cameron to burnish his own and his government's credentials, while cynically promoting a toxic free market system that continues to widen inequality and removes the ability of people to develop on their own terms. Events at home clearly illustrate the need to move away from immense corporate domination of our food chain. It clearly doesn't work for too many people. We need to look outwards. We need to use our new Fair Trade Nation status to promote positive choices that ensure people across the world are free from a system that locks in poverty and have the ability to develop and feed themselves. The IF campaign is putting world hunger on the agenda, and a commitment to end it will need structural change, and we here in Scotland must play an active part in achieving this change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Patricia Ferguson to be followed by John Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I firstly congratulate my colleague Sarah Boyack on securing this debate today, a debate which is particularly welcome during Fair Trade Fortnight. Can I also add my congratulations to all those towns, cities, schools, colleges, universities, church groups and all those other people and organisations who have contributed so much towards Scotland achieving Fair Trade Nation status. It is quite some time since the intention to aim for the status was first announced, but I don't say that as a criticism. For me, it was always about how many people and organisations you could persuade to join you on the journey, not getting to the destination quickly or first. That people go to bed hungry today should be the greatest scandal of our age. But actually, the greater scandal is that they go to bed hungry in a world with enough food for everyone. Now, Save the Children tell us that 2 million children die every year or have their development damaged irreparably because they do not have enough food. They also tell us that malnutrition is the underlying cause of death for some 2.3 million children every year. And we know that if you're not well and you're hungry in the first place, that your resistance to everyday diseases is going to be so much more weakened. And we also know that families in the developing world often have to choose between, say, paying for education and buying food. Particularly, it has to be said, when there are girl children in the family. These choices are not choices that families should have to make in this day and age. And Oxfam, Save the Children, SCIAF and the other 147 organisations supporting them are right to identify this as a topic to be considered as we approach the next G8. And these organisations are to be congratulated, Presiding Officer, for their imaginative approach to campaigning against this outrage by drawing our attention not just to the problem, but to the root causes of the problem, and by demanding that action begins to be taken to tackle it. And they are right to say that the G8 needs to take action to enhance food security and the transparency, accountability and governance throughout the food system. And I was going to contrast the ideal of that particular demand with the situation we've experienced with the horse meat crisis in recent weeks. But Alison Johnson has more than adequately addressed that, so I won't bother going back over that one. But it is welcome that the UK Government plans to use the G8 to focus attention on this issue. But they must go further. They must also look at their commitment to development and deliver on behalf of us all. I mentioned fair trade at the beginning of my contribution, and of course one of its aims is to provide better working conditions for farmers. But many of those working on the land in developing countries are finding rivers diverted, land contaminated, and in some cases land grabbed from them by wealthy conglomerates. Add to this the fact that climate change disproportionately affects the most vulnerable people in the world, and you have a perfect storm of crisis throughout large parts of the world. Presiding Officer, the IF campaign has identified the problems and the solutions. It's up to us, all of us, to make 2013 the year in which we begin to tackle global hunger.
Thank you very much. John Mason, to be followed by Alison McInnes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and again can I thank Sarah Boyack for raising this subject and securing this debate. I think the briefing material we've had has been very impressive from Oxfam, Tier Fund, SCIAF, amongst others. And there's a lot we can say and a lot of figures we could quote, and others are doing that during the debate. But I thought I would just focus on two main points. Firstly, that we need fairer systems, which includes trade and land ownership. And secondly, that we need to increase overseas aid. In one sense, it's actually one point, because I believe strongly that we need to do both of these. Some would argue that the need is so great today that it should all be about immediate aid, giving people actual food. Just yesterday, I received an email from Tier Fund asking for the appeal for Syria, and clearly there and elsewhere the need is right now. It's not 10 years ahead, and some would argue that the longer term is a luxury we cannot afford. On the other hand, others would say that short-term aid will just need repeating and is not very worthwhile, so all the effort should be in long-term investment, changing the rules, changing land ownership. But I think if I can make one point today, it would be that we need to do both of these, not either or. And I'm glad to say that I think most of the briefings we've received from the different groups have actually covered that. So firstly, some of the points around a fairer system, a fairer trade system and so on. And I think it is a problem at a time especially of economic pressure, where we are just now, that for many in our society, the need is to buy the cheapest product, the cheapest food, the cheapest clothes, and perhaps not worry too much about where it came from. And clearly for some people in our society that has to be the case, and we do not criticise them for that. But the reality is many of us are able to make choices, and do make choices, as to what we buy and how much it costs and where it came from. And the reality is, if we take this country as a whole, we are a rich country. If we reallocated our own income and wealth more fairly within Scotland and within the UK, then more people here would be able to pay a fair price for the goods they buy. Secondly, within the system, we need more transparency in company accounts, and I think that is recognised as key. I am an accountant. I wholeheartedly support that concept. It has been estimated that developing countries are losing something like £100 billion per annum from tax dodging, and I have seen higher figures than that. We used to think it was only the developing countries that were being fiddled out of their corporation tax as profits were moved away to Western investors. However, we now realise that the UK and Scotland are also losing out as multinationals move their profits around. So we need, for all these reasons, accounts which show the prices that goods are crossing borders at, and hence what the turnover is and what the profit is in each country along the supply chain, which, as we have already been reminded, can be extremely long at times. And thirdly, land ownership is key in all of this. Our own land ownership has been a problem in the past and has been updated, but we probably need to go further. And yet even here we have seen resistance from rich landowners to reallocating land ownership. I certainly do not advocate we march into other countries and change their laws like some colonial power, but we can work with and hopefully support local groups who are seeking to improve land ownership. The Bible has an interesting concept that all land should revert to the original family every 50 years, but maybe that is a little bit too radical for some of us. And then the final point on the fact that we need to give more overseas aid. It's been said often, and we can't say it often enough, that we should be meeting the 0.7% target and hopefully getting to 1% in due course. I believe it's better to give that aid as much as possible through the third sector than through government. I certainly have more faith in many NGOs than I have in many governments. And I do hear those saying that we need to help those at home first before we help those overseas. But I believe we can do both. We are a rich country and we can do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alison McInnes, to be followed by John Scott.
Thank you, and I add my congratulations to Sarah Boyack for securing this important debate. The world produces enough food for everyone, but not everyone has enough food. 1 in 8 people go to bed hungry at night. 2 million children die each year because they can't get enough to eat. Enough food for everyone aims to turn the shock and anger that people feel when they hear those statistics into a will to make a difference. It asks us all to unite in saying that it's unfair, unjust and totally preventable. It's an inspirational campaign mobilising people from all walks of life. And there's a manifesto for Scotland which sets out clearly why we should be involved and what could be achieved here, and I'm committed to play my part. It asks Scotland to play its part by supporting, protecting, inspiring, learning and improving. Now, there's no doubt that those countries most affected by climate change are by and large those that contributed the least to it, and they are poorly resourced to respond to the challenges it brings. So I welcomed the introduction of the Climate Justice Fund last year, and I support the calls for the CGF to match that of the International Development Fund by 2016, and I look forward to hearing from the Minister later on that ask. Scotland can and ought to lead by example, and we should use the opportunity of the procurement reform bill to ensure that public sector purchasing decisions do not support trade where goods or services are produced using environmentally damaging methods or that exploit workers in poor countries. That purchasing power that we have is worth around £9 billion a year, and it should be used to support change around the world. SCIAF has pointed out that unfair trade means that smallholder farmers still only receive a tiny proportion of the price that we pay for our food. Despite producing food for 1/3 of the human race, the majority of the world's hungry people are small-scale farmers. 80% of the world's undernourished people live in rural areas, and the majority of those on small farms. Scotland has a good record of supporting fair trade and has just become a fair trade nation. We must build on those foundations. Oxfam's briefing note to us all explained that global citizenship education is about understanding the need to tackle injustice and inequality and having the desire and ability to work actively to do so. It's a way of thinking and behaving. It's an outlook on life, a belief that we can all make a difference. Oxfam lends support to the development education centres in Scotland that play such a vital role in providing professional support to teachers and youth workers so that they are equipped to deliver global citizenship education. In my own region in the North East, the Montgomery Development Education Centre in Aberdeen is doing sterling work. It has an extensive library of resources which explore issues like global awareness, citizenship, human rights, the environment, sustainable development and so on. It supports schools and communities in their quest to include these issues in the curriculum. Some schools start out on the journey by introducing their pupils to the Rights Respecting School Awards, others with the more familiar issues surrounding fair trade. But however the journey starts, I'm quite clear that the teaching encourages a new way of thinking, not only about life in other countries, but also about how our own communities operate and how to bring about a fairer society. The Montgomery Centre is working with many schools in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire, but is currently working in a more immersive way with all staff in 6 primary schools to embed citizenship education more quickly and more thoroughly. Aberdeenshire Council, where Liberal Democrats have been involved in running the council since its inception, has a member of staff seconded to the role of Citizenship Development Officer, and she works closely with the centre. And last summer, a number of primary school teachers from Aberdeenshire travelled to Uganda as part of the Global Teachers Programme, run by the Link Community Development Charity and funded by the Wood Family Trust. Global citizenship mindset is key to unlocking a fairer and more just Scotland, and it's important that the good work of the DEX, currently operating on a shoestring budget, is protected and enhanced, and I urge the Government to invest more in this area. Let me close, Presiding Officer, by giving my wholehearted support to the campaign.
Many thanks, and I now call John Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I would like to start by thanking Sarah Boyack for bringing this campaign to the Scottish Parliament. and securing the debate on her motion today, which I am delighted to support. I also want to declare an interest as a farmer and a food producer, a very deliberate and conscious career choice at 21, when I returned home from university to run our family farm and produce food for a then hungry world over 40 years ago. Regrettably, little has changed, because the issue of world hunger is still one of the most serious development challenges the world faces. As Sarah Boyack's motion states, nearly 1 billion people around the world do not get enough food, and undernutrition holds back the growth and development of millions of children. As has already been said, each year 2.3 million children die from malnutrition, and 14% of all women, men and children go to bed hungry every night, a truly shocking statistic. Food prices have recently been at their highest in decades and are increasingly volatile. This not only affects developing countries, but even in the UK, many hard-working people struggle to find the money to feed their families, highlighted this week in North Ayr in my constituency, where 33% of children, or 1 in 3, are born into and reared in poverty. As anyone who wishes, or as anyone who visits a supermarket can see, there's enough food for everyone, but people cannot afford to buy it. And the rising number of food banks in South Ayrshire and across Scotland is further testimony to that, if one was needed. That said, there is little doubt that climate change is having an impact on global food production, and extreme weather events are also causing food price spikes, as well as concerns over security of supply. Last year, the Scottish Government announced it would set up the Climate Justice Fund, and the first funding commitments were announced in June of last year. Well done. The UN Summit at Doha this year was also a key opportunity to promote the work already being done in Scotland and the UK, and I would encourage all countries, particularly the EU, as they deliberate on the reform of the CAP, to understand the importance of food security and the implications of climate change, and join us in taking steps to mitigate its impacts. The motion we are debating today calls on the UK Government to do more to tackle food poverty and protect land from abuse. And I would like to take the opportunity today to outline, albeit briefly, what is already being done at a UK level. Under the coalition government, UK annual spend on nutrition has almost doubled, from 19.3 million in 2009-10 to 37.5 million in 2011-12. And last year, during the London Olympics, ministers used the international exposure to hold a global hunger summit, which led to the commitment to develop and deliver drought-resistant and vitamin-enriched crops that could help to feed millions of people. As has already been mentioned today, women and children are often worst affected by hunger and poverty. And by 2015, the UK will have reached 20 million pregnant women and children under 5 with nutrition programmes. The IF campaign also calls for the UK Government to meet its commitment to spend 0.7% of GDP on development spending and to take full advantage of the UK presidency of the G8. And this year the UK Government will become the first G8 country to meet this commitment, and ministers plan to use a major event before the G8 summit to drive further global action to reduce hunger and malnutrition. They will also drive forward progress on the G8 New Alliance for Food Security and Nutrition, which aims to lift 50 million people out of poverty over the next 10 years through sustainable agricultural growth. Another concern relating to provision of food and sustainability of crops is the issue of large companies avoiding paying taxes, thus depriving developing countries of the funds necessary to implement food security measures. And the Prime Minister has put tackling tax avoidance at the top of the G8 agenda. But this is a global issue which needs to be tackled on a global scale. And in the Prime Minister's recent letter to G8 leaders, he highlighted that they can lead the way in information sharing to tackle abuses of the system, including in developing countries, so that governments can collect the taxes due to them. Presiding Officer, this is a matter of enormous importance to those less fortunate than ourselves, and also to my constituents at Riverside Church in Ayr, who have drawn the IF campaign to my attention. I look forward to hearing from the Minister what further help the Scottish Government is able to give in support of this enormously worthwhile IF campaign. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call on Humza Yousaf to respond to the debate. Minister, in 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I think it's been a very good debate. I'm, like all the other members across the Chamber, grateful to Sarah Boyack and recognise her commitment to international development, not just actually in this Chamber, but from reading her biography, even before she came into this Chamber, had a passion for international development. I'm pleased that we're debating this issue through bringing it to the Chamber. Contributions across the Chamber have been excellent. Jamie Hepburn, Alison Johnson, Patricia Ferguson, Alison McInnes, John Mason and John Scott, all really doing the subject justice. I only have a short time to close, so I may have to give some weighty issues a relatively cursory response, but I'll try to get through as many of the issues that have been raised by members as possible. But I'd like to start by reiterating the support of others in this chamber for the objectives of the IF campaign and its focus on investment, land, tax and transparency in support of development. The IF campaign manifesto makes requests a number of actions for us here in Scotland, and as a Scottish Government we will consider them with care. I've already had the pleasure last week of meeting with some of the key spokespeople in the IF campaign to discuss the manifesto, and hopefully we'll make progress with that. The members will appreciate it. It's only been a month since the launch, and so these discussions will be ongoing, and we'll keep members updated. But I can give you some outlines of where I see some general direction in terms of our response to the IF campaign asks. The launch last year of the Climate Justice Fund, something that was mentioned by a number of members, Sarah Boyack, Alison McInnes, John Scott and others, by the First Minister Mary Robinson, with a £3 million contribution, was a significant innovation, the first of those projects being announced recently. I note the IF campaign requests for additional investment by the Scottish Government in the Climate Justice Fund, so that it matches the International Development Fund by 2016. This is a reassuring sign of the success of the Climate Justice Fund, and in the short term we have announced our intention to host a major international climate justice conference in Scotland in October of this year. So campaigners can rest assured we are consistently looking upon how we can improve upon what is an already internationally recognised innovative fund. On development education, you'll be aware that enabling young people to develop responsible global citizens is an integral part of the curriculum for excellence. At this point, it was something that was mentioned by Jamie Hepburn in particular. And yes, I will be more than happy to visit his school should the invitation come. I'm just sorry he never gave us a rendition of the IF campaign song. But we want our young people to have an understanding that of Scotland's place in the world, our ability to make informed ethical choices on matters that will affect them now and in the future. We recognise and value the contributions made to global learning by Scotland's development education centres, be they in Alison McInnes's region or any other part of Scotland, and therefore we're very pleased to have announced that co-financing arrangement that followed their successful application to the European Commission. The funding will support valuable projects which raise awareness of issues including poverty and the effects, but more importantly, and I think this is something Alison McInnes alluded to, and more importantly, they will sow the seeds of humanity and compassion within our children for the future. It was very clear throughout a number of contributions made by members that the forthcoming procurement bill is of great interest to a number who spoke today. Plays a central role in the Scotland Protects ask of the campaign. Existing public procurement legislation we know already permits exclusion of bidders who have been convicted of a number of offences relating to bribery, corruption, fraud or non-payment of taxes. The procurement bill will establish a legislative framework for substantial public procurement amongst that supports Scotland's economic growth. Some of the areas that have been looked at: a public procurement processes which are transparent, streamlined and proportionate, taking account of social and environmental sustainability, dealing with inappropriate conduct and poor performing suppliers. I know meetings have already taken place between Scottish Government ministers and NGOs and officials on the specifics of the bills, and I know as the bill is developing, these will come to the fore. Guidance will be developed over the coming year to help public bodies to comply with the requirement of the forthcoming legislation, and I'm sure members of this group will take a keen interest. Tax avoidance was also mentioned, and on a number of occasions my colleague John Swinney has said very clearly that a planned consultation document on the future of tax management bill will consider the issue of tax avoidance further, but stated and made it very clear that the Scottish Government is committed to establishing a fair and transparent corporate tax system which attracts and retains genuine economic activity in Scotland. Scotland would adopt rigorous institutional and accounting to ensure that this takes place. I think a number of colleagues also mentioned the fact that we're doing this during Fair Trade Fortnight, a few days after it was mentioned that Scotland has achieved Fair Trade Nation status. But quite rightly, as Alison Johnson said, it's not the end by any stretch of the imagination, but simply the beginning. The request that the Scottish Government monitors and improves its impact on global hunger and poverty is an important one. I'm aware that the Swedish approach to civil society reporting on government will be discussed at a forthcoming NIDOS conference, which I will be attending, so I'll be of interest to hear about that as well. The suggestion that Scotland uses its history to inform current global debates is an innovative suggestion. I'll be attending an Oxfam event in Helmsdale on Monday and look forward to hearing more about this element of the campaign. We do, of course, recognise the crucial role that land reform plays in the success of a country by improving or preserving the relationship between land and people. A number of the If campaign asks are currently out with the gift of the Scottish Government looking at the wider national campaign. Allow me, therefore, to just develop on some of these points very quickly. The If campaign requests that the UK Government meets its commitment of 0.7 GNI target. I welcome the UK Government's insistence that it will meet that target. I think it's very welcome that it will be the first G8 country, but extraordinarily overdue. We have mentioned that in the future, should we have control over powers of international development, the Scottish Government will commit to that 0.7 target and look towards 1% as well. But perhaps more importantly, and just in closing, Presiding Officer, Scotland would look to develop a very clear policy coherence for development across government, building on best practice of international examples so that one part of our policy does not harm international development on the other hand. With that in mind, I was particularly concerned about the Prime Minister's recent proposals to use aid money on defence. I hope that's something that he will reflect on further and hopefully abandon. It is by giving these issues, the issues that are highlighted in the If campaign manifesto, as much attention as possible. By bringing the Parliament to speak in one unified voice, I think we can do it a great service. I commend Sarah Boyack for bringing forward this debate. I will continue to keep members up to date as we go through that manifesto and make progress on that. But once again, I'm very pleased to be taking part in closing this debate on behalf of the Government.
Thank you very much. That ends Sarah Boyack's private members' debate, and I now suspend this meeting until 2:30 p.m.